Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I am Justin.
And we are going to try to talk about Star Trek, the original series mostly, with a little bit of tidbits from other series that we've seen, but basically the idea here is I actually just got finished doing a pretty significant binge watch, not of the whole original series, but of a significant amount of it. Basically, my dad came to visit, and he's a big original series fan. And I had picked it up on Blu-ray a long time ago, maybe a year or so ago, and I hadn't bothered to watch it. But since he was here, he was like, "Oh, this is fun. Let's watch some of this." And so over the course of like a week and a half, we sat down and we watched something like 34 episodes. It's 34 episodes that I actually watched, and like 6 more that I kind of half watched. And so I thought it might be fun to talk about the elements of writing of the original series compared a little bit to some other Star Trek stuff. But Justin, you're not particularly knowledgeable about Star Trek, is that right?
Not really, no. Well, that is correct, but I'm not knowledgeable on it.
Okay, so this is going to have kind of the effect of a half-blind review to a certain degree, although we're not really reviewing in this case, but hopefully you'll ask some fun and silly questions that we will enjoy.
Yeah, I know a few of the characters, and I know a little bit about some of them, but not much.
Sure, that's fair. So the series itself came out on television in the U.S. in, I believe, the late 1960s. I mean, we're not going to do like a historical overview here, but I believe it went through about 80 episodes, and it's one of those classic old science fiction television shows that a lot of people have a really strong feeling about, right? Like the Kirk versus Picard debate goes on even today, right? And, it's funny because having watched a lot of The Next Generation as a kid, it's very incredible how different these two shows are, honestly. And it's amazing how much standards have changed since The Next Generation, because honestly, there are quite a few Next Generation episodes that are kind of rehashes or reimaginings of other Next Generation episodes. So this was a thing that still was going on in the 1980s when the Next Generation was coming out. But like the original series, by comparison, has a lot of that as well. But it also has kind of I'd almost say kind of like a pulp sci-fi feel to it in some ways. Well, I mean, first of all, it's very campy, and I think it was still probably recognized as pretty campy in its time. You have William Shatner, who, is doing a good job in general, but his way of delivering lines is, infamously funny. And the plots are usually pretty bare bones. There's a lot of repetition of plot elements. There's a lot of cases where the episode ends with Kirk saying something snarky and then kind of grinning almost while looking at the camera as things fade out, almost Looney Tunes-esque in a certain way. A lot of TV shows in the 50s and stuff had these kind of episode conclusion moments, and those kind of made their way into Star Trek, the original series. I mean, we get a lot of repeated themes, like probably the one that was most noticeable was "A computer runs a civilization poorly."
Always a classic.
Yeah. I mean, a classic, but like we didn't need 6 episodes out of the 34 that I watched that were based on that theme. That's about how many
it's
there
always
were.
weird. That's what's weird about going back and binge watching some of this stuff. I
Yeah.
went back recently and binge watched all of Heathcliff,
Oh,
like the
okay.
cat.
The cartoon show,
And
yeah.
there were no less than 3 cartoons where he lost his memory and did not know he was Heathcliff, and so all of his enemies messed with him.
I see.
Yeah, it's really weird when that happens.
Yeah. I mean, like, let me see. I've got a list here of episodes that I watched, and like, there was an episode of where like they were in a cave and they were making android doubles of people, and Lurch was in there, and it was one of those things like, oh, we made these androids to be perfect and perfect replacements of the people that they replace, and then we created a failed utopia based on that kind of thing. That was a fun. That was an interesting episode because
And it had Lurch.
it had Lurch, which was one cool thing about it. But you know what's really goofy about that episode? Guess who wrote it?
I'm going to say Terry Nation?
No, Robert Bloch.
Wait, what?
Yeah, Robert Bloch wrote it. The Cthulhu. The Cthulhu guy. I mean the Cthulhu derivative guy. Yeah, he wrote that episode. So, if you're a big Robert Bloch fan, which I can understand, it's definitely worth checking out. According to what I read, the script by Bloch was incredibly rough, and then Bloch was like, "Here's the script, I got to go."
Well, that's what he did. He wrote Pulp Fiction, and he wrote it fast, and so he wasn't going to stick around once he was done.
Well, so apparently the rest of the guys that finished the work on it were like, "Oh man, this is so rough. We're going to have to just like make most of this ourselves or something like that." But anyway.
Well, that's how television worked back then.
Yeah.
No, I thought, I was like, I couldn't figure out who you were possibly going to bring up because it was like,
I know it was a bad idea to just be like, guess who wrote this thing, and you'd be like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I made my guess based off of what you said. I was like, maybe it's someone related to Doctor Who because that sounds like a Cybermen plot, but I don't think that. Wait, am I thinking of Terry Nation? I think it's Terry Nation, the guy that created the Daleks and wrote a bunch of Doctor Who. Yeah, so I just assumed, okay, well, that's the one link I could see with some other kind of science fiction.
I mean, it's not a bad guess, but yeah, Robert Bloch. I was watching the credits, I was like, no, it can't be the same Robert Bloch. And so I went and looked it up, and it's like, yep, it's the same damn Robert Bloch. How strange.
That is actually way more interesting, to be honest.
There was also an episode written by Harlan Ellison that we watched. So, like, yeah, there's a lot of... Some of the episodes had some writing chops behind them.
Yeah.
Whether that translated to the screen or not is another question, right?
Yeah, the Great American Pulps doing their thing. They are basically made for things like those kind of television shows.
Yeah, and in the same way, there were a lot of pulps that dealt with the same kind of topics over and over again.
Yeah.
Just because they were so prolific. But like, we had a bunch of episodes where there was some supercomputer that was doing something and it goes berserk or goes wrong. There was one where, let's see if I can find some of these. So there's an episode called Shore Leave where it's kind of a meme episode because that's the one where Dr. McCoy starts to see characters from Alice in Wonderland.
I remember hearing about that. I've never seen that episode, but
yeah,
I do remember that.
It's kind of a meme episode at this point. But like, it's funny in that episode how oblivious the characters are because they're like, it's very obvious that like the thing that appeared is the thing that they were literally just talking about 5 seconds ago, and they don't make that connection for like 37 minutes of the episode.
That's always so great
in like a 45-minute show. So like it's like McCoy's like something Alice in Wonderland, and then he sees the white rabbit and it runs off, and then he sees Alice and she runs off, and he's like, I don't know, it's just I thought I saw a rabbit and a girl, and it's like that. But I think he mentions that he was talking about Alice in Wonderland, but he doesn't make the connection that because he was thinking of Alice in Wonderland, that's why they appeared. Same thing happens with Kirk, where Kirk is like, there was this guy I knew in college, and he was a real asshole. and then the guy appears, and Kirk's like, oh, that must really be you, kind of thing.
I mean, it's one of the staples of older television shows that you'll be watching them and you'll know what's going on in like the first 2 minutes, but then you're just watching the characters stumble around that fact.
Yeah.
And you're like, these are supposed to be smart people.
Yeah, they are.
And we've come full circle on that because I saw that Batman and Superman Dawn of Justice movie,
right,
which I'm sure you're aware of.
Yes.
And I remember the scene where the Flash appeared to Batman in a vision and was like giving him this warning, but it went on way too long, and it's just like,
and it was super cryptic.
But they didn't. Well, no, they didn't even explain whether he was hallucinating or actually getting a message or was just imagining it, or they did not elucidate whatsoever what was going on in that scene. Like, was he actually seeing this? Was this something that only the viewer was? Because he was just sitting there with a blank look on his face, and he didn't respond to it at all, even after the fact.
Yeah.
And this happened several times in the movie, so it's just like, okay, well, now we're just not acknowledging the hallucinations.
I mean, we were when we talked about that particular movie, I did ask if what's his name, Affleck, was on something as Batman.
And it's entirely possible.
And it's entirely possible, yeah. But like that episode's funny because like the whole planet that they're on is like run by this underground factory that like literally reads people's minds and then creates the thing they're thinking of. And so like it's so funny the way it ends because first off, this is like episode 8 of the whole series or something like that. It's very, very early in the first season. And McCoy gets killed like halfway through the episode. Like a knight on a horse with a lance runs up and impales him.
Ho!
Yeah, and
very Monty Python.
Very much so. And at the end, they're like, "Oh yeah, we could fix him." And like he just walks out from off screen with like 2 artificial women on his arms, and he's like, "Yeah, this wasn't so bad."
That sounds about right. You know that night thing reminds me of. Have you ever seen the show Smiling Friends?
No.
It's one of them cartoons where it's just like really goofy humor just to keep the jokes flowing, and you know, everything isn't really connected in much of any way, but they connect all the jokes together to make it funny. Well, there's this one.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the episode, the 2 main characters are in an argument about one of them is like, "Oh, did you hear the Renaissance men are coming to town?" He's like looking at a newspaper, and the other guy's asking, "Well, what are the Renaissance men?" He's like, "I don't know what they. I'm just saying it says here that
just says on the paper." Yeah.
They argue for like 45 seconds, and then they just completely drop it. And then at the end of it, there's this whole thing where they were like at war with this other company that was, you know, we got the Smiling Friends. Their job is to make people smile.
Yeah.
And then they had the Sad Friends or something whose job was it to make people sad and depressed.
Okay.
And at the end, the sad ones came around to the idea that they should make people happy too. And then out of nowhere, they get like speared or like filled with arrows from crossbows from these guys that are riding horses and wearing Knights Templar uniforms, and then they take off, and the one guy is like, "What the heck was that?" It's like, "I think that was the Renaissance men. I mean, I said they were coming to town." He's like, "Yeah, but they didn't even look like the right time period." And then they start arguing again. It's like, I don't know. I'd read that they were coming to town. That's all. They just brought it full circle for the end of the episode, and then that was it.
Nice. All right.
It was pretty funny, but. It sounds like there was a different director that day, and on that day he was just like, "I want to put so many ideas into this that I can't, so it's just going to be weird."
Yeah.
And that works sometimes, other times it doesn't. Maybe one day we'll have to talk about that particular episode
let's
of Columbo.
be fair, this was one of the less weird episodes of the series, so...
All right, that is... I mean, I don't know for sure, because I haven't watched that many, but I will take your word on it.
So, there's another fun element of the series that I think... has never been reproduced in any other series that I've ever seen on television. And that is the Vaseline lens. I don't know what to call it. But like this
I know what you mean.
Okay, so have you seen this in something? Am I crazy?
It's in a lot of movies of that time period too.
Oh, really? So basically there'll be cuts where it's just a neck up picture. It's a neck up shot of a woman. And like compared to every other shot in the show, the lighting is different. The camera's kind of like lens is kind of screwed up, so things are a little fuzzier. It happens so often that it becomes like this running gag almost. Especially when so the first episode is called The Man Trap, and it's about this creature which is like a salt vampire or something, whatever, right? But the salt vampire basically appears
that makes sense.
As like a particular person in people's memories. And so like Kirk and McCoy come down and they land on the planet, and McCoy sees this woman, and it's like, oh, this is my old girlfriend from college. She still looks like she's 19 or 20, and Kirk met this woman, but met her like 20 years later. And so he sees her as the 20-year older version of the same woman. And so like you get these shots where McCoy is looking at her, and you get the Vaseline lens, and then Kirk looks at her and you don't get the Vaseline lens. It's very funny.
Well, clearly one of them had been drinking.
I mean, Scotty does most of the drinking in the show. There's actually an episode that hinges on that.
I mean, we all know that Scotty does the most drinking. Nobody had to tell us that Scotty does the most drinking in the show.
McCoy does some, and Kirk does a little bit less. That appears to be the hierarchy.
Yeah, they're not allowed. That's Scotty's alcohol.
There's one episode where they land on a planet that has like a special form of water that has the effect of making people drunk, but just by touching them. And that is the episode that you want to watch if you want to see, what's his name? George Takei run around without a shirt. So, if you're into that.
That's the episode I don't want to watch.
It's called The Naked Time, but thankfully it's not that naked. It's just shirtlessness. Let's see.
That's usually what he drinks before he writes stuff on Twitter.
It's actually very funny because George Takei is running around with his shirt off with a fencing foil and like running at people and yelling at them that he's the knight of something or other. It's actually pretty funny of an episode, to be perfectly honest.
I gotta say, that's probably peak George Takei.
It might have been, yes. Well, I mean, in the peak George Takei might have been in the Shore Leave episode where he like imagines a gun, and it's just like a standard like Smith & Wesson 38 revolver, and it's just on the floor, and he's like, cool, a gun, and he just starts shooting at things.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot more. There's just a lot more character and tension in the idea of someone just charging people with a foil.
I guess so. What's funny is that episode 2 and episode 3 are basically the same episode. It's basically somebody gets mental powers and it turns them into a crazy. There's a lot of this where like a person or an entity gets special powers or has special powers and uses them to do like bad things, and like the lesson is like, don't abuse your power, I guess. And this happens over and over again. But
that is a very 1960s sci-fi thing.
Well, like the best part is that this episode 2, the second episode is I believe called Charlie X, and it's like a kid who's like 15 or 16 who has these mental powers. It is almost like a what would you even call it? Like it's basically a remake of that Twilight Zone episode. It's a Good Life. It's very close to that. The one with the kid. Does
he turn Homer Simpson into a Jack-in-the-Box?
He does not. But he does like make a bunch of people disappear, and Kirk is like, you can't. Kirk is like, you can't make a woman disappear because she doesn't want to kiss you. It's very strange. But then they go on to have the audacity in the very next episode to have one of Kirk's old friends from Starfleet Academy get the same thing happen to him, where he gets these special mind powers, and it's a little bit different, but not different enough that it's worth talking about.
He got a different update.
Except that this episode is the first one where Kirk gets into a bunch of hand-to-hand combat, and this happens over and over and over again, where Kirk has to like punch some dude or like do some fist fight with some guy, and inevitably one shoulder of his shirt gets torn off, and it's also very funny because you could tell that this was never intended to be played in Blu-ray quality, because on my 1080p television, it was clearly obvious that we were dealing with a William Shatner body double very frequently, and so that was it was one of those things where it's like, well, no one's going to notice that this is a body double, but now we do because it's on a higher quality video. We get some of that.
Used more Vaseline.
It would have helped, honestly, but no, they didn't.
It's just like a wig that's rocking back and forth as he's moving. You can clearly see it coming apart at the seams.
No, I mean, it's like a totally different guy. Like it's some dude that doesn't have the same facial structure as William Shatner, but he's got a close build, And so,
he's
like
blonde.
from a far well, he's got the same hair color, but from like a far shot at like really low resolution, you could confuse the two pretty easily. So that's basically what they were doing.
I would love it if there was half a second scene somewhere in there where Charlton Heston was being a body double for Captain Kirk.
I mean, most of the funny stuff was intentional and in character in the series, as far as I can tell. Most of it is people joking about Spock. There's a lot of that. Like, haha, Spock, you don't have emotions, and Spock just stands there.
Well, because he doesn't have emotions.
Exactly. Another thing that's worth mentioning about the Kirk fistfights is that there's an episode. It's a super big meme where it's Kirk versus the Gorn, the like kind of the lizard guy monster,
where he gives the double hand clasp.
Well, he does that to everybody, but like there's it's very famous the sight of him fighting this green lizard monster thing, and it's famous because the green lizard monster guy is fighting deliberately, really, 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 really slowly, and I mean really slowly, like Kirk like is.
You're in a Steven
around.
Seagal movie slowly.
No, it's worse than that.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah. And so, like, it's funny because that becoming a meme kind of colors the rest of the perspective that you have on the rest of the fist fights in the series, in the sense that, like, well, a lot of them aren't really that bad. There's a lot of jump cuts and there's a lot of, oh, that's not Kirk. Oh, that's not Kirk. Oh, that's not Kirk. But, there are enough scenes where William Shatner is actually in there and, like, swinging his arms around and doing stuff. And usually it's not like the guy who's up against him is going so slow. Like the impression that you get from watching the Gorn episode is that William Shatner was sitting in a director's chair and he's like, I must not be touched by my opponent. And so like the guy who's in the poor guy who's in the Gorn suit is like, well, William Shatner told me not to touch him, so I'm just going to have to go really slow.
And you're sure this isn't a Steven Seagal ripoff?
I mean, I don't think Steven Seagal had made a movie yet at this point.
No, he hadn't.
And so it was just one of those things where, like, I expected watching this for all of the fights to be that bad. Where, like, Kirk fights his friend from college, and his friend from college is like, I'm going to get you, and he swings comically slowly, but, like, no, it was mostly just the Gorn fight where they went really slow for no clear reason that I can justify.
Maybe Gorn stands for gosh, or I don't know, something running in neutral. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
It just sounds. It sounds like something funny, like would happen in some kind of weird martial arts movie. Like, yeah. I remember watching a video once where someone was like, people talk about Steven Seagal like he's actually good at this stuff, and he is kind of good, and he is a Aikido master. He is a martial artist. But if you ever watch his demonstrations, nobody actually takes a swing at the guy's face. He never actually has to block a real punch. And then I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, you're right. He doesn't even do that in his movies. Like, if you go and watch a scene of a Steven Seagal movie, nobody's actually swinging at his face. So it's just him moving around a bunch of people that can't hit people. They can't hit him. They're just these wild swings, and he's not really dodging so much as staying still but being mobile enough to make it look like he's dodging.
Yeah.
And so when I hear that, it's just like, now I'm only ever going to be able to think of Steven Seagal in that situation now.
Yeah.
The Gorn versus Steven Seagal.
There were so many episodes that were like, a computer runs this colony of people and has made things horrible. There's an episode called A Taste of Armageddon, where this is the idea behind the story. There's 2 planets in a solar system that are at war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to minimize damage to property, that is like buildings and stuff, what they decided to do is this. They will still run the war through like a series of supercomputers. And the supercomputers will determine who was killed in the war. And then all of those people who were killed in the war report to disintegration booths to be disintegrated.
That is way less humane than actual war.
Well, the funny thing about it is, of course, is that Kirk lands on the thing, and they're like, "Oh, yep, Kirk, you're dead." And Kirk's like, "No, I'm not." And they're like, "Yeah, you are. You got to report to this place." And so they get into this bizarre, like, Metal Gear Solid stealth thing where they're like skulking around these buildings and trying to avoid getting disintegrated while themselves blowing up these disintegrator booths. And they're like, the people are like, "Oh, but you're destroying these disintegration booths. We'll break the treaty if we don't disintegrate all these people by this given specific time." And it's like,
I'm sorry. How dumb would anyone have to be to enter into a treaty where it's like, all right, if a computer says that your people on your side die, they have to die? It's like, isn't the obvious move just like, oh my God, they're falling for it? Yeah, just pretend we have the disintegration booths. We're gonna destroy these people.
Look,
and I think they have it coming.
This is a cultural product of 500 years of conditioning, right? These people have been conditioned for the last 500 years to diligently report to disintegration chambers if a big computer tells them that they're dead. And it's just first contact with humanity that's like, no, we're not gonna report to your disintegration booth. We're gonna blow up your disintegration booths. That solves this problem.
It's like people who are conditioned to think that roads couldn't possibly work if someone in a suit somewhere wasn't like counting out pennies in a jar.
Well, the funny thing is that the way that they describe it is that if we break the treaty, then they will actually use real bombs. And so then not only will we die, but we'll also, all of our buildings will be destroyed and our art and culture and etc. will be blown up. But like,
okay.
It's a very silly episode.
This is like the silliest AI war that I've ever heard of. It's just like, well, if we break the treaty, they'll use real bombs. Okay, but in an unsimulated way in which you might not be dead.
Yeah.
I don't see the downside to this. It's like, what? But they'll destroy our culture. You're literally walking into disintegration booths. You're literally bendering it. What is going on here?
Yeah.
What is this society?
Let's see. We had an episode called The Changeling, where there's this super powerful computer that's running around the inside of the Enterprise, and Kirk, quote-unquote, logics it to death. Because every computer is obsessed with being perfect, and therefore if you can show a computer somehow that what it has done is not perfect, it will commit suicide.
Or it'll become sentient. That's another way to...
Yeah. I think that the idea is that the perfect computer is already sentient, but yeah. There was an episode called The Apple where it was a tribal planet this time that was controlled by a computer that was hidden behind a cave that looked like the face of a lion or something. And like the people were used to being just kind of replaced when they got old. Like the computer would generate more people and put them in the village for them. And they had to like
Logan's Run kind of thing.
Yeah, actually. But like Logan's Run, but without the debauchery. Because like, as a result of being replaced, they also had no notion of what like love and affection were, and so like there was a whole bunch of plot points of like various members of the Enterprise crew being like, don't you feel anything, blah 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 blah, and then Spock being like, no, I don't feel anything.
It's Captain Kirk too. That's the worst part about it, because I just can't. He's like in a room full of these people, and he's like, so like nobody here ever gets, a few drinks in, and and that's right. Like half the episode is just him going around to different people's like so nobody's like kind of like nobody, maybe popping out back, and
not even a little. It's funny because it was very strange. I don't know exactly how to put it, but it wasn't Kirk doing most of this. Kirk is a weird character because he actually has a lot of like rather annoying superhuman characteristics that are kind of
Sherlock Holmesian
plot armory in a sense. So like, when there is a guy and what he's doing is he's using this science ray to like delete people's memories, Kirk is the one who can resist it. Right, when there's a fight between this superhuman android and regular people, Kirk is the one who can fight off the android. when there's something for someone to be too strong of will to submit to, Kirk is the one who's strong enough of will to not submit. And
when there's a room full of 5 people that don't have any affection for one another, Kirk is the one that takes 3 of the women and says, we're going to make some affection.
And then, like, the camera goes Vaseline mode, and that's what happens.
And some smooth jazz plays.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it wasn't... Well, no, that's not true either. There were... Who were the people? Most of the time, the interactions were either Kirk or Chekhov, actually. Chekhov was like a inveterate ladies' man in this show. And it's funny because he didn't even appear for like half the first season or more. What other fun things did we have?
Yeah, were there any other computers running societies that you have noted?
Oh, yeah. Computers running... Well, I mean, there was one where, like, McCoy finds out he has a disease that's going to kill him in a year, and so they go to this colony that's ruled by a computer, and they figure out that it's a computer, and the computer's like, well, I'm going to make the room you're in very hot, and they're like, well, then we're going to blow you up. And that's basically the conclusion of the episode.
Thanks, Hal. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I have seen a couple episodes of The Next Generation. I have never sat down for a full episode of the original. I've only ever watched the first 2 movies that they did.
Sure.
And
sure.
I don't even remember anything about the first one, unless maybe that wasn't. I don't think that was the one where the guy built the warp speed engine.
No, that was
Next Generation, wasn't it?
That was the first Next Generation movie. Yes.
Yeah.
Sort of. So the way that it worked was that the first Star Trek movie was called Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I'm pretty sure that was the one with. I haven't seen that one in ages.
I remember The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, The Wrath of Khan was the second movie, and that was actually an episode of the show too. Like, there was a Wrath of Khan episode of the show and the guy's name is literally Khan, Noonien Singh. So they like totally stole that episode and added a little bit to it to make the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't remember what that first movie was about. I can't even remember if I saw it or not.
It's like there's this super intelligence and they have to go chase it down. I'm not sure I think that's not the one with Voyager, but it's like something else. Or maybe that is the one with Voyager. I guess I don't know. But like the Star Trek movies are a totally different. The Star Trek movies were made in the late 70s. And the first one was. And like by that point, like things had changed enough that Star Trek the original series was not like the thing anymore. Like things were moving in either a Star Wars direction or in more of like things were moving in the Star Wars direction, and the original Star Trek the motion picture kind of moved itself in like a 2001 A Space Odyssey direction, and it didn't go so well. Later on, The Next Generation is kind of fascinating because the first season of The Next Generation has a bunch of scripts that are actually like scripts that they didn't use for the original series, and then it moves into new scripts that are much more, I guess, like character driven, much more like contemplative, right? Like Picard's a very different character from Kirk. Spurk.
I just know that I saw enough of the movies that all I saw was them being repeated over and over. Like Star Trek Nemesis was the Next Generation version of Wrath of Khan, and it wasn't nearly as good as Wrath of Khan. And then they went ahead decades later and made a new Wrath of Khan that was so far removed from what Wrath of Khan was, and such garbage that it was just like, why? I think Star Trek might be done. They're done. Cooked, as the youngins say.
Yeah, exactly.
And given that I don't really see much about Star Trek anymore, I think that might be right.
The thing is that Star Trek has been in this death spiral because...
Well, where was the explosion of popularity? I mean, it was a very popular 1960s show, but I feel like The Next Generation like propelled it to a new level of popularity.
I mean, the thing about The Next Generation... I mean, I'm speaking from kind of old memories because I haven't seen any TNG for like 20 years. But The Next Generation was heralded as like kind of like its middle seasons of having some of the best science fiction scripts that have ever been placed on television. So, and of course there's the occasional like, wow, this is a really good episode, and wow, this is a really bad episode, and how did they do this really good episode, and then the next thing it was this garbage. There's some of that. There's some of, the first season's very rough because they didn't quite have a handle on their characters yet. There's also like, okay, season 6 and 7, the cast is kind of getting tired of this, and they're not really, they're kind of losing a little bit of their steam kind of thing. Then what ended up happening is that, like, they kind of pushed, first off, they pushed in kind of like a darker, more mature direction. That was Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which I only ever watched like 1 or 2 episodes of. I think I was too young to appreciate it when it came out, so I just didn't watch it. Then there was Voyager, which kind of tried to be, like, kind of Next Generation, but like it was kind of somewhere midway between like the tone of Next Generation and the original series. A lot more, things got more bombastic. Basically, is that it was more about like shooting and all kinds of crazy action stuff happening, and all the recent Star Trek stuff has been basically that.
The movies and
plus there was a lot of like infiltration of like modern political messaging in like a lot of Star Trek shows, and so that got really that was really
the stuff
divisive.
that made no sense in the context of the universe they were in.
A lot of it made no sense. Some of it made some sense, but like it still was just like, why are we doing this? This is not part of what Star Trek is about. I mean, the original
very
series,
ham-fisted.
The original series has a lot of episodes that are just like, meh, you can kind of skip them. It's not a huge deal. But there are some really good episodes of the original series. Like, there's an episode called "The City on the Edge of Forever," and this is the one that was written by Harlan Ellison. This is a famous episode where Kirk and Spock and McCoy, Kirk and Spock go back in time to chase McCoy back, and they find out that they have to that Kirk falls in love with this woman that turns out if she doesn't die, then the U.S. takes a too pacifistic stance in the face of World War II, and then the Nazis get the atomic bomb first. Like it's actually a very
he murders
interesting...
her in cold blood.
No, it's not that simple, but like it's actually a really interesting
Spock
episode.
murders her in cold blood with a tire iron, like he did in that episode of Columbo.
No, it's actually really funny because, like,
as long as it's funny.
They're standing on the sidewalk, and she's walking across the street on the other side of the sidewalk, and she's like, "Hey, it's you guys!" And she runs across the street and gets hit by a car.
And Spock, in a moment of rare emotion, is like, "Got him!"
Yeah, basically. No, Spock is actually, the way that they handle Spock is actually, I think, really good in the original series, because what they do is they don't give you an exposition dump at any given time. They hit you with one little thing every couple of episodes for Spock, and it kind of helps to develop his character gradually, and it works really, really well.
So he's like a Fritz Brenner in the show.
I would say his development is like that of Fritz Brenner, but he's very different in tone from Fritz Brenner.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He's the Star Trek's Fritz Brenner, where he's just slowly you get little pieces about him here and there that develop his character over time.
Yeah. But of course, they're a little bit. I mean, he gets a lot of screen time too. So like, there's a lot of people like poking fun at him for being perfectly logical, and there's a lot of him like someone insults him, but he doesn't take it as an insult because he's like, no, that seems pretty rational to me.
Oh, so he's a libertarian?
No. He nerve pinches people way too much to be a libertarian.
So he's a libertarian sympathizer.
Probably not. They don't really. The thing about it is that the Next Generation kind of had a lot of, not a lot, but it had a little bit of like this kind of like post-scarcity collectivist tone to it, and the original series just kind of doesn't. The original series is pretty absent a lot of that stuff, in the sense that like, I mean, like they have an episode where I think they rated like a movie that had Nazi costumes, and so they did like a Nazi episode, and they're like, obviously they're like, Nazis are bad, but like at the same time they're not like, they don't treat it like it's some kind of thing that you're not supposed to talk about. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
it's the kind of thing that kind of blunder into things sometimes, but at the same time, they don't treat the viewer with like kid gloves in any. I mean, they treat the viewer with kid gloves in the sense of the complexity of the plots, but in the sense of like, here's the thing that's happening, and it's really bad. They never like baby face that kind of stuff. Probably, maybe they do. I only saw 34 of the episodes out of 80, but that's just how it goes.
It really parallels the early Doctor Who in a lot of ways in that sense.
I mean,
it's like there's a lot of goofy things going on, but the things that are happening is like these are bad situations.
Yeah, well, I mean, like there are a lot of things that look cheap because they just didn't have any real special effects budgets. But
right.
It's not a tongue-in-cheek show, right? Like it's not
right.
It's not making fun of itself. It's not metaing itself for the most part. Like for instance, there's one episode that gets memed on constantly, where there's a scene in the episode where Kirk is literally reading the Constitution, the American Constitution, to a bunch of aliens. And people look at this and they say, well, obviously this is, kind of like silly because Kirk is bringing the Constitution to these people and telling them that this should be their ideal, right? But if you actually watch the episode, that's not what happens at all. Like the episode the story is actually about like convergent evolution in a sense, where these two groups of people who on one side represent communists and on the other side represent Americans, they kind of like convergently evolve the same documents that Americans had. And so the Constitution that Kirk is pulling and out and reading is actually one of their holy documents. They just don't know how to read it because they are semi-literate, because they've had like hundreds and hundreds of years of like poverty and inability to like educate each other basically. And so like when Kirk is reading the Constitution, he's not reading the American Constitution. He's reading an alien document that they are worshiping as like the source of their love of freedom, which happens to coincide through a series of, cosmic coincidences with the American Constitution. And so like, I've seen a lot of these memes about stuff and seeing that they're not quite the same as like the memes simplify them out to be was kind of fun too. Like the Edith Keeler thing is kind of interesting. Like, there's kind of a point there. Like, kind of like a counter-libertarian point there in a sense. Like, if the U.S. hadn't built the bombs and ended World War II and had stayed out, what if, a really bad group of people got, atomic weapons first? Well, I mean, that's actually an interesting point to kind of think about. It was fun. I mean, at some point, watching 30 some episodes over the course of a week, I did end up putting my headphones on and kind of like half watching a couple of episodes, like the one where the kid gets these mental powers and reenacts "It's a Good Life" from the Twilight Zone, which ironically William Shatner was in the Twilight Zone as well. But I like that one. I only half watched because like I was like, yeah, this isn't particularly interesting. There's a lot of like really bombastic acting from William Shatner as Kirk. Like one of the early episodes is called "The Enemy Within," and it's actually kind of cool because it's one of the episodes where like there's evil Kirk, right? So Kirk gets split into two people, kind of quote unquote good Kirk and quote unquote evil Kirk, and you can tell them apart because evil Kirk is wearing eyeliner.
Charlton Heston. Oh, right.
No, he's wearing eyeliner. But like, the funny thing about it is that while they could have done just like a good versus evil thing, they actually mention that like it's not actually that simple because like the evil Kirk has, ambition and decisiveness and things like that, whereas the quote unquote good Kirk is lacking those things as well. I mean, if you wanted it to be a simple message, that kind of muddles it, but I think that's the point, is showing that like, yeah, we could separate these kinds of emotions into good and evil and just kind of call ourselves done, but at the same time we might be losing something by making this oversimplification. No, it's just kind of fun stuff.
Yeah. I don't know what story that reminds me of, but there is a science fiction story that followed a similar plot to that. I don't know if it was before or after that episode, but I'm going to have to see if I can figure out what it is. I doubt I'll be able to anytime soon.
So one thing that the show was definitely bad about handling was mystery.
Not surprising.
There's an episode called The Conscience of the King, where, like, there's a guy who's an actor on, like, some planet, and he's, like, they're like a traveling acting troupe. And there's a suspicion that he is like he's a dictator from a long time ago who kind of escaped death and didn't go through the process of justice like he was supposed to. And, like, the way that they handle this mystery is so bizarre and silly that, like, it's just, like, unbelievable to a degree, because everybody's like, well, we were going to do a voice print analysis. It's like, well, is that going to give you, like, an actual, like, conclusion? And and then like the guy himself is like, I'm trying to remember exactly how it went, but, like, his daughter is like, his daughter tries to protect him, and she tries to shoot Kirk, and then he steps in between her and Kirk. Because he's like, I was trying to get away from all this bloodshed, and now my daughter is going to kill someone on my behalf, kind of thing. And, like, after the whole very, very, very subpar mystery, it is not a very fun or interesting conclusion. There's a lot of episodes that are basically Monster of the Week. And the best part of the Monster of the Week episodes is that either A, the security team simply doesn't understand how to maintain a 360-degree observation of things. So, like, there's one where they, like, have, like, 4 guys, and the 4 guys all look in the same direction, pretty much, and, like, this mist monster comes out from behind them and kills them all. And it's just like, well, that was surprisingly easy. There's one where there's, like, this monster that's running around in the mines and, like, burning people up. And, like, again, there's just a bunch of people who are totally get surprised by this giant shuffling thing. And then there's also the cases where, like, their phasers almost never work. Like, they're almost always up against something where our phasers don't work, so we need to come up with some kind of new solution. And some of those are kind of funny as well.
Have you tried hot lead?
I think there is an episode where that happens. There's an episode where they land on a planet that, like, somehow magically got turned into, like, Gangsterland Chicago. I don't think I saw that one, but it does exist, so...
There was this brief moment in that episode where all the characters were like, whoa, the feeling of power I get holding this tool.
Right? There's a lot of episodes where, like, they come across some kind of, like, godlike intelligence, only to find out that it's not as godlike as they think, kind of thing. Or, there's a lot of variation on it, but it's a pretty common theme that some kind of crazy thing that is amazingly powerful and we can't possibly fight. We have to fight it. There's one where they land on a planet, and there's a guy who has been listening to all the, like, who's been watching the Earth from, like, 900 years ago, because of the amount of time it takes light to reach his planet. And he's, like, he's all set up with, like he's dressing like Napoleon and stuff. It's very funny. And it turns out that, like, oh yeah, he has all these amazing powers, but actually he's a child because the thing that happens at the end of the episode is that his parents come and they apologize to the Enterprise crew for the mischief of their son.
I remember. I must have either seen that episode or there must have been another story that was like that I saw, because that sounds familiar.
There's a lot of episodes where, like, stuff that happens that should be irreversible gets reversed. Like, there's this one episode where the whole crew, except for Chekhov, or not the whole crew, but a good chunk of the main characters, except for Chekhov, get afflicted by this disease that causes them to age rapidly. So we get like old senile Kirk trying to, like, maintain his authority over the crew, and people having like a court martial of him to be like, can he keep doing this or not? And then at the very end, there's like, oh, I came up with a medicine.
They're rationing out the Metamucil.
Yeah, well, like, at the very end, they're like, oh, we're in trouble, and there's a guy the guy who took control of the Enterprise because Kirk is indisposed, isn't very good at being a starship captain, and then, like, there's, like, a medicine, and they're like, I don't know if it's gonna work, and Kirk's like, give it to me, and then they give it to Kirk, and he's fine. There's a lot of planets that they land on where like there's these just plants that like shoot spores at people.
That's a pretty big get off my planet sign.
Yeah, you'd think so, but like most of the time that they get shot with these spores, it actually holds them on the planet more.
I mean, yeah, okay. That's I guess that's a pretty big stay on our planet sign.
Apparently, well, like, okay, so there's this one episode where there's a planet that was supposed to have a colony on it, and like it was found out after the colony landed that like there was this kind of radiation on the planet that would just kill everybody, or it should have. But they go there and they find everybody is healthy and happy. And the reason that they're all healthy and happy is because of these plants that shoot spores at them that make them kind of like vaguely high and just happy. Like they all just become happy and they all want to become farmers. And like the way that Kirk solves the problem is just by pissing them all off. Because it turns out that all you have to do to counteract the effects of the spores is become angry.
Viva la revolution.
Yeah, and yet as silly as that episode is, it becomes like a important Spock episode because that's one episode where Spock at the end is like, this was the first time I was ever actually happy. And so there's a little character development.
And that's when he went on his bender.
Yeah.
6 nights of booze and women.
Well, that's called Amok Time. That's the Ponfar episode. I only half watched that one. There's a lot of episodes that were pretty clearly designed because, hey, we found a bunch of costumes in a trunk somewhere, so we're going to do an episode here. Like there was an episode where, what if the Roman Empire never collapsed and it was still going on in like the 1960s, and they have like television shows of like, gladiator arenas and stuff. I mean, that was pretty fun. Well, it wasn't super good, but it was like funny.
It's like the director's a 12-year-old. Guys, I really want to use this prop. We don't have anything written for that. I really want to use this prop. All right, we'll work something out.
The other thing that I think is worth maybe mentioning really quickly is that around the point of The Trouble with Tribbles, which is maybe 20 episodes or 30 episodes in, my dad just started skipping episodes, like a bunch of them. And like things I was surprised about by this. A lot of the famous episodes we skipped, because I looked at like the list of all the episodes, and like we skipped The Trouble with Tribbles and a bunch of other ones. We skipped all the Klingon episodes, which I was surprised by. But there are a bunch of Klingon episodes that just apparently my dad didn't want to watch.
You seen one, you seen them all.
Yeah, right? But what we did see were the Romulan episodes, or at least several of them, which, again, there was some cool stuff there. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting experience, kind of halfway between, because like there was enough repetition that I felt like no TV show could get away with this these days, right? People would say, because like what would happen back in the day is that you would watch it, and then maybe you'd miss the episode next week, and then you'd watch the one after that, and it wasn't like everything was syndicated and repeated over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so like you could get away with it.
Except for computers running planets. That was repeated quite a bit, apparently.
Well, like, it was 4 or 5 of the 34 episodes that I watched. But, like, if you're watching half the episodes, or if you're watching 2/3 of the episodes, you could very easily miss most of those. And, of course, they were always a little bit different, but, again, like, it's one of those things where it was like, oh, wow, they had 80 episodes over the course of, I think, 3 seasons. And, nowadays you get 12 episodes a season, or something like that.
Not if it's on Netflix. You're getting like 4 to 8.
Well, yeah, okay, so 12 or less. But, like, if you only have 12 or 4 or 8 episodes, then you really can't have any repeat episodes. The original series did get away with quite a bit of that. Lots of pause acting by William Shatner, which is not necessarily saying it was bad. It's just that the way that he delivers lines is very distinct and a little bit silly sometimes, because he does do some pretty good acting. Like when he's forced to play multiple different characters in an episode, like he does a pretty good job of differentiating them. There's one episode. This is the episode that my dad really wanted me to see, which is the one where there's like this woman, and she's like super, super jealous of Kirk. And I guess like she was an old girlfriend of his from like a long time ago. But like women aren't allowed to be starship captains or something. And so she was very jealous of him. And then like he lands on a planet and she's there and she's like pretending to be sick. And then when she gets him alone, she pushes him into a box that switches her personality with his. And so Kirk, throughout most of this episode, is basically acting as if he is this woman. which basically means that he gets super emotional at everything,
Accurate.
which is not the well. I mean, it is accurate for her character, but it is something that these days would be seen as incredibly sexist. But setting that aside, it is pretty interesting to see him change all of his mannerisms and the way that he speaks and stuff like that for the purposes of a role. And it means that there's at least something going on there. It was a fun show to watch some of. I'll probably throw some of those Blu-rays in at some point and watch some more. One other thing I gotta say, packaging is so bad these days for these discs that I don't even know what to say about it.
Let me guess, it came with one of the clips broken, and so the disc is just rolling around inside.
No, it would have made more sense if one of the clips is broken. But no, the way they did it was that they have these spools that can each hold 2 discs, but there's also overlap. So you would have 2 discs that were under 2 other discs. And because things weren't properly pressed down on, discs would just pop out, and you'd open up the box, and 7 discs would just fall out onto you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of collections like that.
Yeah, it's really bad. One of the worst I've ever seen. There's a lot of, I don't know. It was one of those things that made it actually more difficult to watch the show than it should have been, because you had to fumble with all these friggin' discs, where they put 3 or 4 episodes per disc. And so we have 20 Blu-ray discs or something like that in one big package. And it was just a pain in the butt, to the point where I'm thinking that I'll go get some empty Blu-ray things at some point and put them into their own things so that they don't all scrape against each other over and over again.
With really bad crayon drawings of characters for each one.
Yeah. So I don't know, any questions or things you wanted me to elucidate upon?
I think that I kind of just want to sit down and watch some of them at some point. I mean, for as cheesy as they can be, I liked a lot of the early Doctor Who episodes, and it's just like Star Trek, where occasionally there's something really good in there. I think there's the entire run of the second guy that played the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best episodes that came out of that were probably the ones where they landed on a planet where there was this guy that was a dictator.
Yeah.
And he was basically trying to keep society peaceful and win a war.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing was, he looked exactly like the Doctor.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was the guy that played the Doctor playing both himself and an evil version of himself. This guy that everyone kind of didn't know what was going on with this guy. So he was basically running society, and he was given power over society because he seemed to be able to predict when earthquakes were going to happen.
Okay.
And so he had all these people thinking that he could do that. And then it turned out there was this underground society that he would sneak back to.
Uh-huh.
And all of the people in this underground society thought that the earth was just devastated above, and he was the only one that knew anything about. There were mutants and everything, according to him. He had these people believing this lie that Earth was just a wasteland and full of mutants and radiation that could kill them, and so it was only really safe for him to go out by himself and search for supplies. And he had pulled this off for something a decade, or I don't remember, a long time.
Yeah.
And nobody had ever really pressed him on going up to see the world with him. And anytime anyone else ever did, they disappeared.
Sure. Kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So eventually the Doctor and his friends were the ones that kind of exposed that he was doing this to one of his aides in the upper world,
mm-hmm.
who decided that he would help them stop him. But it was just, the guy was just, I don't even understand, what level of depravity they were having on display with this character, because he was running himself ragged as a dictator to hold on to this power.
Yeah.
And it was all an illusion on both sides, everything that he was doing. And he didn't really have supreme authority, because at any time the military would have been able to overthrow him. Mm-hmm. And in the end, once he was exposed, it didn't matter anymore. But it went on for several episodes, and it was the Doctor who eventually showed the Doctor in most of the show, most of those episodes, was refusing to help stop this man. They had a whole plan where they were going to have the Doctor impersonate him and use that to gain proof of what was going on. And he refused to do anything about it because nobody had proven to him yet that this was actually a bad person. And so he had everyone kind of like giving him, he was like, I will help, but only if you prove to me that he's this dictator you claim he is. Yeah. Because the Doctor didn't know that. It was just a really strange and not very often used plot device I saw, where for once the good guy believed that the bad guy may just not be a bad guy and wanted proof first. I haven't seen that done that much, and he really held out until the very end, where it was like, okay, now I see. Now I'll help you solve this problem.
It's funny because
it was some of the best Doctor Who that there is, and it was, those early ones are not known for being very great when it came to story writing, but that one was particularly good.
So I mean, there's only, I think, 1 2-part episode, or maybe there's more than. There's very little continuity in Star Trek: The Original Series. You can basically watch it in any order that you really want to. There's 2 episodes in the first season that are a 2-parter, and the reason they're a 2-parter is because they were the way that they basically incorporated the pilot into the television show. Because back in the day, the pilot wasn't like something that went out on TV. It was something that was shown to, executives and producers and stuff, so that they would be like, oh yeah, we'll fund this, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this whole episode that was made called The Cage, which had a different captain of the Enterprise, guy named, the character's name was Christopher Pike. And the funniest thing about that is that his second in command was a woman, meaning that the last episode that me and my dad watched, the one that's like, women can't be starship captains, is denied by an episode by 2 episodes in the first season, where a woman was literally 1 step away from being a starship captain. So, but like they took that 1 episode that they made for the pilot, and they spliced that footage into 2 episodes that they had Kirk in to basically kind of tie up the loose ends that were left at the end of the pilot, so to speak. So yeah, it was. There's very little continuity in the original series. You can basically watch any episode you want at any time, which is another thing that is kind of reminiscent of the pulp short story era, right? Where people would just write short stories, and then they'd write another short story, and maybe they'd have the same characters, but it wasn't like you had to read this shadow novel before you read this shadow novel for the most part. Of course, they got rid of all that in later Star Treks, right? The Next Generation has episodic qualities, but it has a lot more through lines that go from the start of a season to the end of a season, or especially from the end of a season to the start of the next season. There's a lot of that. Right. And then there's even more of that in like later series, where it's like, now it's basically a soap opera, but with spaceships. The original series doesn't have the feel of a soap opera, because first off, there's just too much weirdness, and second off, there's no real like overarching story that you really need to like pay attention to in any sense. There's no big bad guy that they're kind of after throughout the whole series, or even throughout a whole single like season. Stuff happens, and then they move on, and then more stuff happens, and then they move on.
Right. Something that you could just sit down and pretty much pick anyone you wanted and watch. Yeah.
Which is something you just don't see these days. So, I mean, just on that point alone, I think it's something worth checking out, at least to see how you approach it. And then at the same time, old Trekkies still have the Kirk Picard argument, so there's got to be something to this original series. Definitely feels a bit dated, but it's still fun to watch. So, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I know I'm going to check some out now. I mean, I've never really gotten into the whole Star Trek thing, and I always had other things to keep me, busy. But given that, science fiction has pretty much taken a nosedive in terms of television and Hollywood and even anime, it might be worth going back and checking some of that out now.
I mean, it's funny because I've been reading a bunch of Doc Smith stuff, and like Doc Smith stuff is actually fundamental behind a lot of the early Star Trek stuff. There's someone on my personal YouTube channel. I did
Doc Smith, the Lensman guy that we discussed once.
Yeah, right? yeah. So before the Lensman, Doc Smith had an earlier series called Skylark, and there's a lot of stuff in Skylark that Star Trek basically lifted almost, like, almost word for word. Dude with green blood, to the point of that kind of similarity. And so it's just kind of fun to see, because this is a really unique point. It's not the Flash Gordon serials. It's not the Next Generation. It's somewhere in between, and it's not super pulpy, and it's not super intellectual either. It's a really weird, well, not weird, but it's a really interesting middle point between a lot of these things where, science fiction has kind of moved from A to B in a lot of different ways over the years. And the original series is kind of an interesting middle point in that movement. And I think that makes it kind of worth maybe not watching all of, but watching the good episodes of and kind of thinking about them. There's definitely some fun issues that are talked about in there. So it's fun. It's a fun show. And a lot of people like it. So, even if you don't like it, it's sometimes helpful to look at something that is incredibly famous and beloved by many people, to see if it's something that there are elements of that you do want to incorporate into your own writing or whatever.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like it's competing for people's beer money.
Yeah.
I think I think I finally figured out what that means. I told you the story about I think I submitted. Well, it wasn't even a book. It was a short story one time.
Yeah.
To a magazine, and they sent me back a note that said, "We're really just trying to compete with people's beer money." And I was like, "Well, I don't understand what that means, so I'm just going to publish independently from now on." But it's like I thought about it for a while. I was like, "Do they mean that I wrote it too smartly for people? It's just a short story about a thing that eats planets, and that's how humanity is fueling their teleportation." And that it's just like, that's not particularly bright. It's just
not particularly literary.
Yeah, it's so like, what do you mean competing for beer? Like people could buy this potentially instead of beer, or they could buy the beer. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me, but I didn't understand what they meant by that. But I think I kind of get it now. It's just like, yeah, Star Trek is just competing for people's beer money. You could go out and have a beer, or you could sit down and watch some Star Trek. Most people might consider doing both.
I mean, they clearly go together well.
Still a weird comparison, though, because it's like, that usually doesn't happen with things you read. Like, very little things are a case of, well, it's either beer or this book I want to read. And especially short stories. It's like, do I read the short story, or do I go and get a beer? I've never actually met any kind of circumstance where someone who occasionally has a beer would be hung up on wanting to read a short story.
Yeah.
From like a subscription online magazine or something.
Right.
So it was just a really weird rejection. But it was like, it was just like, okay, if this is the publishing world, I'm just going to publish independently.
Yeah.
This is just silly. Yeah, I'm going to check out some Star Trek. I'll have to get back to you on what I thought about some of the episodes.
So watch out, because so we should just make note of this. But apparently, I'm not. I haven't independently checked this out. But the Star Trek: The Original Series is streaming on like Paramount Plus or something, right? One of those streaming sites for a specific company. And apparently, they pulled "Where No Man Has Gone Before" out of the opening monologue for Star Trek: The Original Series. And like garbled it so that he doesn't say "no man has gone before." So
why?
Another fun censorship point.
Oh, because they said man.
Yeah, because they said man.
They don't know how to write speeches anymore, do they?
Well, it's not that they don't know how to write speeches. I mean, it's that too. But they also are inept enough that they can take a series where there are 80 episodes of dialogue to go from, and they can't find a series of phonemes that match the word one that would come in place where man goes in that monologue. And also they are so angry about the word being in that monologue that they can't just leave it alone, which would be the sane thing to do, to leave it alone. Don't touch it.
That's a special brand of psychopathy.
Oh yeah. All right. So with
that, no, we're not done.
No,
if we're
not
gonna bring up psychopaths, I just have to This is completely unrelated to our discussion, but it's a little bit
okay.
Of
Lay it on me. Bonus content for people who haven't.
Yes, bonus content. We're going straight from Star Trek to Sonic the Hedgehog. Small leap. Wow. I know. Apparently, I found this out while on that trip to the fighting game convention last weekend.
Yeah.
Apparently, there was a huge controversy over whether or not the stage in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, I believe, called Hydro City, was actually pronounced Hydro City, or if it was Hydrocity.
What?
Yeah, this was a real controversy. A controversy that ran to the extent that they actually had Tails and Sonic arguing about it in one of the official Sonic the Hedgehog comic books.
What?
Yes. Hydro City Zone. Apparently a lot of people pronounced it Hydrocity Zone.
I mean, I guess you could get away with that.
I guess, but it's like, why? Yeah, exactly. Like, why is this a controversy? It's funny that it was such a controversy that it was in a comic book, but apart from that, it's just like...
Well, if you've ever read any of the Sonic the Hedgehog comic books, you know that they were really, really struggling for material.
Yeah. The later ones were. The early ones, me and my brother read a lot, and it was just like, especially the first couple where they had based it in they based it more like in the weekday television cartoon series. They were pretty funny. They did some pretty interesting comic book things that translate well into a written medium or a drawn medium. Yeah. That there was, I remember distinctly, there was one panel that had Sonic responding to something Tails said, and it was a dialogue box, but he had 3 different dialogues in it, and they had check boxes next to them, so you could just check off whichever one you wanted him to say.
I see.
They had a pretty good sense of humor in them for those. It was like the first 3 comics that were like that, and that was it. And then after that, they kind of went with that weird Saturday morning one where they had all those other animal creatures that were freedom fighters or whatever.
Yeah.
And they had a lot better stories at that time in the comics than they did on the television show. And they got really dark, too. I mean, really, really dark. And then they got a little bit weird where, like, there were 2 Robotniks because there was one that was like the regular Robotnik and another one that was Eggman, who was supposed to be more like the Robotnik from the video games. And they went to war with each other, and and
one of them had eyeshadow?
No. One of them looked like the one from the games, and one of them looked like the one from the Saturday morning cartoons. And those comics are probably, if you went back and read, say, the first 60 of them, those might be the weirdest comics that were ever put to print overall. Like just because of how weird and out there it got from the original source material.
Sure.
But yeah, that has nothing to do with Star Trek. There were Star Trek references all over it, I'm sure. There were a few that I recognized. I think they even name dropped Star Trek a couple of times.
That's possible. I guess I have no idea, but yeah, there it is.
Yeah. But, it's science fiction, I guess.
True. I mean, I would say that Sonic the Hedgehog is closer to fantasy than science fiction, but,
It has robots. It does have robots.
It does have robots, but so can fantasy.
That's true.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. This has been the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we'll be back next week with some other crazy writing thing to talk about. Probably.
And many more tangents to come.
Oh yeah, we are all about tangents. They should have called us the Tangent Pair, but there was a mistake at the lodge.
Yeah, I brought up Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.